So I first heard about Department Q on a TV podcast I listened to called The Watch on the Rigger Podcast Network a couple of weeks ago. I've been listening to the hosts, Chris and Andy, talk about TV for years now. And when they both couldn't stop gushing about a new Netflix show that had just dropped, I took notice. Andy specifically shared an anecdote that he was out on a date with his wife and they were deciding what to do next when they both realized all they really wanted to do was go home and watch more Department Q. And with that kind of recommendation, how could I say no? This setting is another major bonus in my personal book. I love any show or movie that is set in the UK, whether in Ireland, Wales, England, or Scotland. The accents make my brain happy. What can I say? You can have two characters, one American and one Irish, and despite them saying the exact same sentence, one will sound infinitely better to me. I've heard the same goes for people in the UK when they hear American accents, though I imagine they get them a lot more often than vice versa, thanks to Hollywood's prevalence across the world. If you're also a fan of accents from this part of the world, I can't recommend Dairy Girls enough as well. It's also on Netflix, and a super banger of a show. Department Q, as an aside, there's a Broadway musical named Avenue Q that I've known about for decades now, and the number of times I've typed Avenue Q instead of Department Q while writing the script is way too high. It's got puppets if you're interested. The Internet is for Porn song comes from this as well. Anyway, Department Q tells the story of an English detective who works for the Edinburgh Police Department solving cold cases. It's based on a series of 10 books written by a Danish author, all set in Denmark. The books have also been adapted into films, all of middling success as far as I can tell, and the author, Jussi Adler-Olsen, has publicly expressed disappointment at changes the films have made to his books. Welcome to the world of film adaptation, Jussi. When adapting a story from one medium to another, the question is only what will be changed, and how much. It's impossible to perfectly adapt a book to a movie, man. And what's important, in my view, is that you keep the soul of the original work intact. What made people love the original IP? Make sure the adapters know what this is, and that they can successfully insert it into their new work, and you'll be fine. As I haven't read the books, I can't comment on whether or not the original spirit of the books is present in Netflix adaptation, but what I can tell you is that I love Department Q. As soon as I finished watching Season 1, I wanted more, which is always a good sign. One of the co-creators is Scott Frank, who wrote and directed Godless, a fantastic Netflix miniseries set in the Old West that I watched about 5 or 6 years ago, and also wrote and directed The Queen's Gambit, another Netflix miniseries that is one of my favorite shows of the last decade. So when I discovered he was behind Department Q midway through my viewing, I wasn't in the least bit surprised. Department Q is wonderfully staged, set, written, and acted throughout. The pacing flows extremely well, the music is excellent, and the characters are real people, which is so very important. The main character is Englishman Karl Mock, who is a bundle of stress and anger from the second we meet him, and he sort of improves as the season goes along. We'll get into why in the second half of the review, but suffice it to say, his feelings of frustration are justified. He doesn't seem to get along with anyone, not his boss, not his flatmate, not his therapist. He doesn't have any friends, and he's miserable, but what he is a good cop. He's smart, he considers himself the only competent police officer on the entire department, an attitude that certainly doesn't help his relationships with his Scottish co-workers. I asked a Discord member of mine who was born in Scotland how he feels about the English, and he said, "I hate the English, but I hate a lot of Scots more," and linked the gif where groundskeeper Willie is going off on how Scots don't get along with anyone, especially themselves. So I gathered that if the show had been set in Ireland, with an English detective leading it, the relationships would probably be a lot colder, as Ireland hates England with a burning passion for reasons we will not be getting into today. But watch Dairy Girls if you want a bit of insight into this whole thing. Seriously, it's excellent. Anyway, Mork believes he is the smartest person in the room, and the problem for everyone else is that he often is. He's very Dr. House, just with an English accent and no Percocet addiction. The concept for the show is that Mork has been given the job of reopening and investigating high-profile cold cases in the department backlogs by himself in the station's basement. I enjoyed CBS's Cold Case TV show from the early 2000s, and if you too enjoyed it, this might be right up your alley. In short, this show rocks. I do have a few complaints, but most of them are story-specific, and will spoil the show for you if you want to watch this. I'll give Department Q an 8 out of 10 with high rewatchability factor, which is not something I do very often. I just want to spend more time with these characters. Scott Frank, you mad lad, you did it again. Now on to the spoilers. If you've watched Department Q and want my take on the show, this part of the video is for you. If you're interested in watching it, this is a mystery show, and having the mystery spoiled for you ahead of time really ruins it, in my opinion. So be warned. Ahead be spoilers. For starters, I definitely enjoyed the through line of Mork trying to solve his own shooting, even when he's supposed to be nowhere near it. The first time he saddled up to Blondie and Mullet to see how they were doing, I was annoyed. But when it became clear that he did have to do their jobs for them, I was much more accepting of his behavior. Honestly, for them to not even check if the guy who called in the wellness check on Mr. Knifeyhead had a sister at all was a massive blunder that I feel like I'd have thought to verify, and I'm not even a cop. So maybe it's not a situation where Carl is a super genius, it's just that most of his coworkers are legitimately not that smart. Edinburgh, I feel for you if this is what's protecting your streets and solving your crimes. The books have a Danish Mork working in a Danish police department, so the Netflix version introducing a bit of a weird message that the English are smart and the Scots are dumb here is concerning. I mean, really, the smartest Scots we meet in the show are the villains and the people directly in Mork's team. Everyone else seems fairly useless. It's just something I noticed. I don't think it's intentional messaging, but who knows? I thought for sure they'd solve his shooting in season 1, but it seems they want to dangle that as a hook to convince Netflix to give them a second season, which really seems mostly unlikely considering Netflix's recent run of canceling even popular shows. I imagine it's just a question of budget versus return for them. Just hard numbers. Rose's introduction was a bit rough for me, but as she got more time to shine, she really grew on me. Seriously, though, the accent helps so much. If Rose spoke with an American accent, I think I'd like her about 20% less. But she's smart and she picks stuff up fast, and she has her own blind spots and weaknesses, just like everyone in the team except for Akram, probably. I really felt for her when she explained she'd been a passenger with another cop who had run over a pensioner. That's definitely got to be emotionally damaging, though for her to take it as far as an attempted suicide seems a bit much. But she does live alone, and is a disappointment to her mother, so maybe it was a combination of everything. As I said earlier, every character has complexity to them, and Rose is no exception. Mork bringing her on a trial basis, and then having her nail her evaluation period, that was great. That made me smile. Akram, as mentioned earlier, may be the only unbelievable character in the show. As a Syrian refugee, he really doesn't have any weaknesses. He's smart as a whip, he's strong, caring, and devoted to his daughters. I guess him working for some unsavory types in Syria before he came to Scotland might count as a negative, but I don't really see it that way. He's a paragon of virtue, and while I love him, I wish he'd show some complexity beyond he's willing to torture people into giving up information. I found Merritt's character to be pretty compelling as well, and it grew on me over time. I really wish they hadn't showed us she was alive until further into the season, but overall, if anyone is going to survive in a hyperbaric chamber for 4 years, it was Merritt. The woman who wouldn't give up on anything and would crush any obstacle in her way, to her own detriment sometimes. I liked the balanced portrayal of what could easily be written as a girl boss who never takes crap from anyone and never suffers any consequences for it. Scott Frank seems to excel at writing real female characters, and this is no exception, in my opinion. Overall, the story design was compelling. I liked how new aspects of the case would be investigated, then discarded or pursued further. I like that they showed us previous scenes and then future scenes as well, kind of mixing them up throughout the episode. The web of intrigue around Merritt's disappearance broadened and deepened in a believable way, and I liked that Carl dragged Scotland's literal Lord Advocate, an ancient role, dating back to the 15th century, into the case, despite the obvious risks to himself personally. And I really enjoyed that the Lord Advocate never in the end admitted to any wrongdoing, but Carl caught him out anyway, and wrangled a bigger budget and a car for himself through the implication. Oh yeah, and getting Akram a fast track to becoming an official investigator instead of just being an assistant. Carl does care about the people around him, in his own way. Also, Carl getting stuck parenting a 17-year-old teenager who isn't even his really ramps up the believability for the stress levels he's experiencing on a daily basis. I have a 17-year-old, and he can be a handful even though he's mine, and I've raised him his entire life. I don't know how I feel about Jasper only really gaining respect for Carl once she watches him beat the ever-loving snot out of that dude on the street, but hey man, whatever works in parenting. Seriously. Carl's relationship with his therapist, Dr. Irving, is unhinged as can possibly be. He tells her that the reason he came back for the second session with her is because maybe he thinks she's pretty. And then he tracks her down to her home and later shows up for a conversation over morning tea. Then he pings her phone while she's on a date to track her and tell her about the dreams he's been having. Carl, buddy, you need to chill out so hard. It's helpful that Matthew Good is a handsome man, because if he was uglier, she'd have a restraining order on him yesterday. The story wraps up a little too neatly for my tastes, with the villains choosing to leave Merritt to her death literally the same day the detectives are closing on them. I mean, I suppose that's part of the reason for closing up shop, but they had 4 years to get Merritt to understand they hold her responsible for Harry's death, and could have easily gotten her there, discovered she refuses to take responsibility for his actions, and killed her in year 1. Instead, they dither around for almost a decade, and then have the genius idea to hang around and try to kill the cops that show up with a shotgun from 20 feet away. Lyle, you idiot. Either shoot them several times from distance or use a better gun, honestly. Walking right up to them when it's clear that Carl shielded Akram from the worst of it was a really dumb mistake for a literal genius sociopath to make. Look, Lyle, you could murder and steal Sam Haig's identity and get away with it, but you can't kill 2 unarmed dudes stuck in a small room with you. Also, from the American perspective, the fact that these poor detectives can only call out "gun" when a weapon is pulled on them is very sad. I know the UK in general has very, very strict gun laws, even for its own law enforcement, but Carl and Akram should be dead thanks to this policy. The only reason they live is because Lyle was inexplicably dumb for 3 minutes. Speaking of Lyle, the kid that got to play teenage Lyle was outstanding. He gets very little to do for the first 3 quarters of the show, but when they find the interview tape of him in the mental health facility after Harry's death, he absolutely steals the show for about 3 minutes. He's bright and cheery, seemingly unfazed by anything he's told or anything that has ever happened to him, but there's this undercurrent of insanity to him the entire time. And Kai Alexander should get consideration for some kind of an acting award, in my opinion. I like that the reason Merritt was grabbed and held captive for 4 years was something she sort of does blame herself for. It's not cut and dry. When Elisa Jennings says Harry was a sweet boy who could never come up with a plan to rob Merritt's father on his own, Merritt doesn't even contradict her. She knows that she's the one who put the idea into Harry's head, and even though she immediately tried to disabuse him of the notion, the idea stuck and led to Harry's death. That's why she went back for his funeral, despite the fact that she believed he'd caused William's brain injury. She felt at least partially responsible, though she would never admit that to the surviving Jennings duo. And was it just me, or was it crazy how much Lyle Jennings and Sam Haig looked alike? I get this is important to Lyle's plan to get close to Merritt, but it's one heck of a weird coincidence. Jack Greenlees and Stephen Miller could be twins in that scene, where they were talking and Sam is trying to make up for poor behavior. All right, enough rambling from me on this one. It's a longer review than usual, but I really enjoyed Department Q, and I hope you did too. May the Netflix gods... Netflix? We'll call it Netflix. How about that? May the Netflix gods smile on us and grant us a Season 2 before 2029, if at all. Amen.